works. Let's all be silent. Let's all give it a chance.
Right, hello and welcome to the Game Factory
That went
podcast.
really well, Move. That went
Yeah,
really
that went
well.
super well. We had like 2 seconds. Yeah, it's enough space for me to find that gap and split it.
It's good.
I'm going to start over. Hello, everyone. Welcome to the Game Factory podcast. This week, I'm joined again by Mike Bithell and Andrew Smith, and we'll be talking about funding your game. So I guess I don't know how to start this conversation. I've mixed the notes up so much. Let's start with the funding model that most people would be using when they're getting funding, and that's publishers. I guess, have you guys, I know definitely Tango went with a publisher. Mike, have you had any projects that were funded by publishers?
We're immediately going to run into the big problem with publishers that every publisher deal is different.
Yeah.
So yes, technically, like Curve and Bossa were both involved in Thomas Was Alone. So those were publisher relationships, but they were focused, on bringing Thomas Was Alone to a bunch of platforms because I wasn't going to port it because I'm lazy, and we're just kind of getting other people to do it. So yeah, that was there, but that wasn't upfront funding. That was for a game that already existed.
Yeah. I guess Andrew, you had your experience with Mastertronic, and I guess that was sort of the typical publisher, I guess what people think of as a typical publisher relationship. Can you sort of talk about, I guess let's start about from their side, like as a publisher, just explain to everyone what their business model is and how it works and how they think about games and that kind of stuff.
Okay, yeah. So on a very, very simple level, a publisher is essentially like a company with money and contacts and a skill set that differs from you as a dev. So they're you expect them to have marketing and production sort of skills and staff. They have like a wider sort of appreciation of the market. They'll have insight into stuff that you don't. And a lot of that is down to and sort of revolves around the fact that most publishers have a portfolio. So that means they'll have multiple games, usually multiple genres. More so now, I think you'll see publishers who are smaller in scale than we used to have, like even like 4 years ago, where you'll have like Devolver's probably a good example because like stylistically they have kind of like a thing, like a thing they do. I think Codemasters recently just said that now they're just going racing games, like literally today. And so you get like these portfolio approaches. It used to be, and I guess there still are some really big ones who will just be like, well, hey, we don't have a fighting game and we think there's room in the market, so they'll maybe look to publish one or sign one up. But essentially the process is they'll have like a hole that they want to fill, and that'll either be something that they're like super aware of and chasing, and they'll put out a request for proposal, an RFP, where basically any dev who's in touch with them will be able to submit like a prototype or a concept for sign off and publishing deal, or they'll just kind of sit there and wait and sort of keep an eye on things and offer interesting games and interesting devs money to make games. And the deals can vary wildly as we...
Yeah, I think, we'll get quickly onto the exceptions to deals, but I sort of feel from the outside, I've never, directly worked with publishers, but I feel like the deal that is sort of the deal that everything is extracted from is they give you a bunch of money to make the game. They may keep the IP, but more importantly, they take a cut of the money and that of the money that it makes. Is that sort of fair to say that that's the core deal that sort of roughly...
Yeah, you're absolutely right. Those are like the core aspects of it, and the way that splits down and stuff can change. So depending on how much money is put into it, and that might be to do with the scale of the project or how finished it is by the time it gets to them. You can have more generous deals. Usually they want to recoup at a higher rate, and then like once they've got all their money back, you kind of split it more sort of fairly over. Sometimes they claim the IP, and especially on an RFP, if it's something they're kind of, it might be something on a license, obviously, in which case the IP is already held by someone else, or if there's a lot of money being put into it or something like that, then they'll look to keep the IP. But that happens less and less, and I think that's partially to do with the size of, like, most published games these days are smaller studios, so the costs are smaller, but also because I think there's so many publishers out there, because the costs are smaller, more people are able to be publishers, and and so the competition's higher. So a developer with a cool idea, with a game that seems like it's going to sell a ton, will actually be in a really strong position in terms of negotiating a deal between like multiple publishers. So a lot of the time, these sort of middle tier and smaller publishers just won't even ask about the IP because it's an instant like no from the developer.
Yeah. I mean, can you guys think of things other than, revenue share and IP that, are sometimes in deals that, the developer can give the publisher?
Endorsement sometimes, that kind of thing, and visibility for the publisher. So if you were like a well-known indie, then that's definitely something that publishers can and will ask for, to make sure that, well, to make sure that like you're going to say good things about them, but also like to impose themselves there. Not impose, that sounds mean, but like, making sure that their branding's there. So for example, if I was, because I've got kind of a reputation at this point, like if I were talking to a publisher about stuff, they would be actively, one of the things that would be up for negotiation is how visible their involvement is. Yeah. If they want their logo splashed over the front and they want everything to be noisily theirs, then they would give up something else. It's always this negotiation. It's like Smithy says, these are all variables that are in play, and it's just about finding where everyone's comfortable and where the trade-off is for these things. Because some publishers won't offer any money for development, but they've got some marketing angles, and if you're shit at that, sorry, first Billy for the show, if you're rubbish at that, then that's something that has value for you. And some publishers, don't want a great revenue share. Like some publishers genuinely don't want to put any money in, but they want a very, very small rev share. Or a publisher, another thing that publishers can bring to the table is what I did with publishers, which is porting. They have, staff in-house who are absolutely happy with just spending time making Thomas Was Alone on every bloody system. And that's something that, you can use. So it's always this kind of buffet, really, isn't it? It's always kind of a trade-off. You have a game. The publisher has everything except for a game, and like if you can trade those kind of qualities back and forth, then that's something that's very attractive. And it is, as Smithy says, it's very competitive. What's interesting is like the different levels. So you have like the publishers, the smaller kind of indie publishers, which have emerged really like in the last like 5 years tops. Like this row of publishers have arrived. Then you have kind of the ones of those that have done very well, which have kind of moved up a tier to kind of backing things at a higher price point. And then you have, obviously your mega publishers, kind of the household name publishers who are looking for much bigger projects and funding those. But then, there's different expectations involved when you're talking about that much money.
I think as well it's worth pointing out a lot of this is directly related to console and PC stuff. I think mobile, from my experience, I did a couple of mobile games pitched to a few publishers. This was like 3 years ago, even, and even then it was wildly different. I mean, things are solidifying a bit more with Steam and whatnot these days, anyway. But mobile became so much about money so quickly that it's very much like the old days of gaming, whereby basically publishers have money, devs have game idea, but money's actually what talks, and so the balance of power is very, very different over there.
Yeah, definitely. I think, last time I was thinking about, when we were working with publishers, I was, a staff member, but it very much was, publishers had all the money, they had all the power, they dictated, what the rev share was, because you weren't going to make your game without them. They would definitely own your IP. There's definitely been clauses that I've seen in contracts that, I think luckily there was a few publisher contracts that came out because of legal cases in America, but there's, strange terms like if this project fails in a certain way, we get this much of your company, or one of the other things that's interesting is sometimes you have like multi-game deals of like, oh, we'll sign a deal for this much money across this many games and that kind of thing. I guess, where do you sort of see like the split between what the developer does and what the publisher does? I know Mike mentioned that it's sort of a buffet of, they have all these things to offer and you sort of pick the ones you want, but what are the things that you can see on this table that you can pick from?
Lots of things. Money is the big obvious one. Money, marketing, like IP. A lot of the time, like publishers will have access to big franchises and IP. If that's something you want to make a game based on, that's something you obviously can't talk to anyone but Square Enix about Deus Ex. Like that's who owns that. If that was what you were doing, you have production skills. That's something that's often overlooked by indies, especially, like just being able to like help you to make sure that people are in the right places doing the right things, something they'll often kind of be happy to help with. PR, which is different to marketing, so kind of community management stuff, that side of thing, which doesn't make sense to have necessarily within a small company, but is something you can tap into. Reputation is one that increasingly I'm seeing a lot of people kind of banking on in terms of, so for example, someone like Devolver, which has a real quality reputation. Someone sees Devolver on a game, there's an expectation of quality there, and that's something that Devolver are rightly now kind of rolling into their pitch to developers. Other than that, skill and capacity to produce in-house is something that is important, you know, so things like ports. They might have, you know, a standing army of developers, artists, people who can kind of jump in and help with projects. That's actually quite common in that they will kind of, you know, there are publishers who specialize in kind of, you know, projects which aren't going so well. So you see this with AAA even, where like a game will be like canned or will be in real trouble with one publisher and another publisher swoops in and saves it, right? Like that's something that happens, and it's never an altruistic act. It's always a, can we make money out of this act? But that's something as well. So all of those, and just relationships and being able, you know, platform holder relationships in particular, that, you know, if you want your game on a console, that's still tricky, you know, even with kind of idea Xbox and the way PlayStation have opened things up. It's still a door that some people kind of feel is slammed in their face, so a publisher can open that door as well. But this over time, this shifts. You know, for like a few years ago, platform access was a massive thing that only publishers have, but now we see that wall coming down. Money is always going to be a barrier to a lot of people, so I think that one's always going to be kind of the core thing.
Yeah.
But yeah, so lots of things. What did I miss, Smithy?
I'd add QA services. I mean, again, it's something that a lot of the companies you can get in touch with and manage yourself, but having a publisher, they've got an established relationship. They know, you know, all the tricks and the shortcuts and all that kind of stuff. And localization, similarly, is a large part of it these days. And yeah, like it's funny. So basically, you can broadly split it down. Like development is like creation, and then like publisher is like, it's less and less a useful word for me now, because I think it's just like everything a good publisher will be basically an office full of people who have the ability and time to get all the other services like wrangled and arranged.
Interest, right? Like they care. That's the thing. Like, you know, I've had this before. Like, it's the biggest enemy with a lot of this stuff to most devs is just like, I can't be arsed doing that job. I don't like that job. And it's something that, to be honest with yourself about and go, well, I don't like doing that, and either you hire someone to do it, or a publisher can often fill those gaps of the things that like we're just not good at because we're excited by coding or design or art or those other things. So having someone who can step in and fill those gaps makes a lot of sense.
Yep. The only other two things I can sort of think of are there's the idea of, because they have a portfolio, there's a few things they can do. One thing is obviously they can promote games across their portfolio. They can curate a portfolio for games of, if you like this game, you would also like this game. But the other thing is, because they have a portfolio, you know, they can get a big booth at some trade show and, you know, sort of split it out between all these individual games, kind of like the indie mega booth does. Yeah. But it's just like, you know, the publishers can do that, where I think an individual dev, you know, trying to, I'm going to go buy all these TVs and that kind of, it's just kind of crazy if you're not really geared up for it.
Yeah, let's talk a little bit. But you see, but again, like, this is one of those things where I think like 2 or 3 years ago, that would have been a mega like limitation. But nowadays, like, arguably, I'm not sure the trade events have the importance they used to kind of culturally, but also, like, you know, you see indies banding together. I've done it a few years in a row with the guys over at Mode 7 and Introversion and a few kind of British indies. Kind of, we banded together to get an area, and that allowed us kind of similar prices to what the big guys were getting, because we were just going there en masse and going, well, you know, we want all of our if you want all of our games at the show, we'd like a good deal. And you start to see that kind of ground level stuff. But then that's because I'm mates with those guys, because we've known each other for years, and that's not open to everyone. So yeah, publishers still have that place, and it's always changing, and I think that will always shift, and the smart, successful publishers will shift with it and always be changing up the services they provide.
Yeah, I think one thing that's always worth mentioning is that publishers are businesses. I think a lot of people sort of have this perception that, that publishers are these dream makers. They want to hear people pitch, and they're just like, oh, well, if that's your dream, we want to make that happen. And on one hand, they do. But on the other hand, they're trying to find the games that fit their portfolio that they think are going to be profitable, right? Yeah. I think that's the important thing that they do. Yeah, it's definitely not a charity. So when you go to pitch to a publisher, what are the kinds of things that you guys think about targeting towards that specific publisher?
So, I mean, when we were pitching Tango, we had I think we covered it in a previous podcast, but we had like a prototype. We went through a couple of steps of pitching with them. We sort of met them and did a fairly casual sort of pitch. I don't do overly formal as a rule, really. If anyone's ever seen me talk, you'll understand. And yeah, I mean, we did, we had a couple of pages of document. I had a lot more in my head and in sort of documents I wouldn't want them to see. We had a playable prototype, and we kind of went through a few stages. I mean, we were sort of careful with the publishers that we chose to pitch to. We didn't try and, pitch. If we were just trying to sign a game, then we would just pitch a different one to every publisher. Absolutely, we'd do our homework, and that would be the sort of sensible thing, but nobody wants to do that. Yeah. So we had
it's
a game.
It's also very expensive to do that.
Well, yeah, exactly. And so what we did, we had the game we wanted, and we didn't just go around and email bomb Sega and Cattail and we specifically went for the smaller, indie friendly publishers, I guess. And beyond that, it wasn't. I guess we didn't necessarily have a spreadsheet of their portfolio and where it fitted in, and we didn't research the sales of all their games and things like that. Maybe we should have, but what we did do was we just focused on our passion for it, banked a bit on the fact that we could compare it to successful games, point out logical ways that you would hope that existing large audiences would overlap with ours if our game comes out the other end how we promise it, and that's a whole different story. So it's kind of, I don't know, it's a mix of being prepared, being able to bullshit a little bit, because that is pitching, and having just something solid to show, much like we said with the trying to get a job, and these days you have to have a game. If you want to sign a game, you have to have something playable. Yeah. I mean, it's crazy not to. If you don't care enough to spend the time working up even just the core mechanic, then they're not probably going to believe you that you're going to stick with it for 12 months. So.
I think as well, because before I was indie, I was a pitch guy in the AAA industry, so I was kind of responsible for putting together designing documentation for games that would never exist, $50 million game every 2 weeks. It was exciting. Very few of them actually ever saw the light of day, but it was fun. And I think the thing that I always underestimated until I kind of found myself in a position where I was going into the meeting rooms with people is how much personality matters, and how much Smithy's saying I don't do the formal pitching. And he's absolutely right. That is one way of doing it. I don't think it really suits games, because ultimately, this is not a case where you go to a publisher and they say, you're really clever. We're going to give you all this money, and just give us a call at some point, and we'll do the marketing, and good luck with it, and we'll see how it goes. It's a relationship. You have to kind of constantly be talking to each other, showing them stuff, getting feedback, implementing feedback, telling them when you disagree with their feedback. These kind of, it's an ongoing. It's like expanding your team, right? It's their colleagues at that point. So that interpersonal human stuff is crucial. I've had experiences before when I've been pitching and talking with people, and it's meeting 4 before you actually firm up exactly what you're talking about, because you're just building that trust and that understanding of what each person wants and what that relationship is, and it's not sinister or Machiavellian. It's just like you're going to be working with these people. You've got to have a relationship with them. You know, and I know that's something some people kind of struggle with, but just having the ability to kind of get to know them and get comfortable with that group of people, I think that's something that's often overlooked. Because, you know, you can get a beautiful kind of pitch document, you can get a fun prototype, but you have to convince these people that you can actually work with. You have to convince them that you're a human being that's not going to flake out on them in a year's time, or say something stupid on Twitter, or, you know, present an incredibly racist talk at GDC or whatever. Like, you have to build that relationship and trust up, and that becomes more important the more money is on the table, both in terms of like literal cash they're giving you, but also their marketing spend. You know, if you're talking about a decent sized game, like, they're going to spend as much on the marketing as the development, if not more. So they're making a very big gamble on you as an individual or your studio as a whole. So it's tricky. You've got to be an adult.
Yeah, I think, you know, when you think of it, you know, once you realize it's a business, basically you have to convince them that you think this game is going to sell copies. Like, it's not enough to convince them that this game is cool. Although that is, you know, one of the angles of, like, you know, convincing them that this is going to sell is, like, it's really cool and interesting and, you know, all these kinds of things. But the other side is also, you know, we've done this market research. We know there's these gaps in the markets. We know there's these comparables and that kind of thing.
I would say, though, just to interrupt you, sorry, I would say that while you're right, like 95% of it is, can the stuff sell? Yeah. There's two things. One is, like, the people, publishers, generally, especially the people who be talking to devs, are gamers. They're into video games. They will get excited by cool things. We're not selling lead piping. We are, you know, there's fun to be had there, and that heart element can play into it. But also, I would say, like, on a publisher level, like, publishers, especially with indie projects, if you're talking to a bigger publisher about a smaller game, often it's cool is actually, like, they might know that this game's not going to sell well, but there are other reasons strategically that it makes sense. If you look at, thinking of, I don't want to poo on anyone's game, but like, there are definitely big AAA publishers who make mega franchises who are also making smaller, more indie, and we can argue about that definition, but like that smaller indie scale production, and you look at it and you're like, that thing's not going to pay for the wrap party of the AAA blockbuster, but that publisher knows that there is a value to them making those kind of games in terms of the perception of the audience, in terms of the way they're seen and how things are going for them publicly. So I think there are other reasons, but it's definitely a harder sell than I want to make you money. That's a much easier pitch process. Yeah.
Yeah, I guess the other thing I was kind of thinking about in terms of, you know, what Mike said about the relationship is, what is sort of the time frame that you guys have had between, you know, first contact and actually money in the bank account?
It's always months.
Yeah, it's always months.
It's always months. Yeah.
And I guess
2 or 3 months at best. In terms of, like, and that's from, like, yes, we want to do this to money. Like, in terms of, like, hey, you should put a pitch together for us, add a month or two. Like, in terms, like, there is these things, and as with everything else, as the cost goes up, so does the processing time and all that stuff. So it's not, if you're looking at your bank account and you're like, I've not got a great amount of time, like, pitching is perhaps not going to get you that influx of cash. And to be honest as well, like, no publisher wants to invest in someone, you don't want someone who looks too hungry, you know. So being able to wait is also part of it, I think, on some level.
I guess the other part of the long-term relationship concept that I wanted to talk about is payment via milestones. Is that sort of the thing that you guys have seen? Is like, it's a long-term relationship with the publisher, and they don't necessarily give you all the money up front. It's, you know, they trust you enough to say, we're going to give you enough money to go for 3 months, and then we'll evaluate and see if we're happy with things, and we'll continue giving you money.
Yeah, they milestone it out. So I don't know for the audience. Some people so a milestone is basically an agreed upon shopping list, basically, of what the game. Basically, the last one is finished game. But, like, there's lots of steps, alpha, beta, the real meaning of alpha, beta, not, or beta, I always get confused. Like, the real meaning is not what the players think those words mean. Like, you know, often you'll have, like, well, it used to be vertical slice. I've not seen vertical slice as much as I used to. But I'm sure that still exists on a lot of, like, bigger budget projects. But then you also have kind of, sometimes a prototype, you know, if you've managed to pitch without prototype will probably be one of the first steps. There's a lot of, and different publishers. Some publishers are like, sure, just send us like 2-3 builds at some point during production, and some publishers are like monthly milestones kind of thing.
Yeah.
So it really, and it's part of that negotiation, you know.
Yeah. Yeah, I think one thing Mike Stout mentioned in chat is that you want to try and pitch things that are like finished looking, like you said, a vertical slice or something like that. I think, when it gets to milestones, it's very different. But when you're actually pitching, you kind of want to show everything at its best. You don't want to give them excuses to say no. I think that's a reasonably good tip. But yeah. Let's jump on to venture capital funding. Have either of you had any experience with this?
Have you, Smithy? I've had conversations, definitely.
Yeah. I mean, I've met a few people, sort of thing, who move in that world, and I've attended a couple of sort of I don't know what they're called, meetings, but
Illuminati. You had to sacrifice a goat on the shrine of capitalism. Yeah, it's the Dragon's Den style side of things, which is investment, which is usually mainly the cash side. I mean, there are definitely fringe benefits if you have an investor in your game who is an established industry figure, for example. Then obviously they have an influence and a capacity which they'll use to make good on their investments. So that goes from everything from like positive tweets, which are not always disclosed, right through to like being able to like get you interest from different press outlets that they know or whatever, or being able to open doors at the various secret levels of power and all that stuff. But then you also have kind of people who are just completely outside the industry who are like, just think it's a fun gamble. Often we're the pet projects of millionaires. Like it's how a lot of independent film happens as well. Is there's a lot of people who this is their hobby and it's fun in amongst all of the very clever, savvy investments they have to be able to just kind of throw some money into that thing that their kid's into or that they're into, and you certainly get those kind of people as well. But there are also super serious video game investors who no gamer has ever heard of, but have put money into a large number of projects that you would have heard of. I was talking to a friend the other day who's managed to get some investment recently, and he joked to me that people always worry about like the Illuminatis and the secret groups and the gatherings. He's like, but that is actually how venture capitalism is. There is that stuff there. There is absolutely these kind of networks of people who invest in projects, and if they like you, then you can get money from them.
So the funny thing is, I'm one thing I'm actually going to stop you on there is just like that word projects. I think that's sort of to me the key difference between a venture capitalist and a publisher is that a venture capitalist invests in a company and publishers invest in projects.
Yeah. And they will often set up a company for a project. Is a lot of the conversations I've had that they'll want to insulate themselves, especially in the UK with the tax credit stuff. A lot of them are specifically wanting. It's like when you watch a film and it says at the end, this film for the purposes of copyright is owned by Bob Productions or whatever. Like you are seeing. You're right. It's often company level.
Venture capitalism, they venture their capital against an exit, and you don't get an exit on a project. You get an exit on a studio. You sell it.
That's true.
Yeah. So it's interesting because one thing that I like a lot about venture capital is that they're committed in the long run. Because, as Andrew mentioned, they put their money into the company and they don't get their money back until the company has what they call a liquidation event, which is the worst term ever. But yeah, either the company sells to someone else or they do an IPO and the shares are sold to the public. But the thing that I think is great about that is that it doesn't affect your cash flow. If you make a deal with a publisher, and this game makes $1 million, the publisher takes some of that money and you have whatever's left to make the next game. Where a venture capitalist invests their money, and as long as, you're just operating, you make $1 million a game, you have $1 million to invest in that next game. And I think that's a really healthy thing, like in terms of cash flow and relationships. The downside of venture capital, obviously, is that they're invested in the long term, and because of that, they really need mega hits to really make their business work at all.
They're also very hard to get rid of. But on a cynical level, like if you have an experience with a publisher where you're like, I don't like the way these people work, or you don't feel it suits you anymore. With a publisher, it's like, well, you made that game and you move along, and you find other opportunities. Whereas with a venture capitalist, they are in there. If they've made that kind of deal where it's the company as a whole, then
Yeah, I mean, they own a percentage of your company.
Yeah,
they may even have a board seat.
you can spend money getting rid of them, but if you're in that
they want
position,
to.
then exactly, yeah.
Yeah, but it's like they may, I guess the extreme case of venture capital is they may have more board seats than you have, and they may replace you and say, "Oh, I think this company should be run by someone else." I mean, that's sort of like the darkest side of venture capital. But I think, I only see venture capital nowadays in free-to-play mobile games because they're the only games that I think, from their perspective, have a decent chance of giving that 10, 100, 1,000x return. I think you make an indie game and you make 10 times the money and you're like, oh my god, this is amazing. And I think a lot of venture capitalists are like, yeah, I don't know if that's enough. I think we're going for something much bigger. They want you to build out a company, a studio that has value in the public eye, not just a project. And we've actually seen IPOs that have sort of suffered from that kind of thing because they only have one thing that they do, and they're like, well, they're a one-trick pony. The market doesn't value them, and as the market goes down and down, it's just kind of really harsh. But I think that's why it's so hard to raise VC money, and I think games are unbelievably hard because it's such a hit-driven thing, and they're a hit-driven industry. And then if they start making hit-driven bets on top of that, it seems to be a very, very hard thing. And I feel like the kinds of people that would listen to this podcast, and the three of us who are making this podcast, I think it's a harder pitch to make because they expect such a ridiculous return.
Yeah. It's I mean, you mentioned mobile. Even there, it is drying up a little bit. It's getting to the point where it's so consolidated that there's just not as many, like, year on year. There's just fewer and fewer opportunities to make those enormous returns, like you say. Like, the interesting thing is, it's actually, venture capitalism is an industry on top of a whole bunch of other industries, right? So, like, it's not like where a publisher's thinking, well, amongst these games that we've been pitched in this market, what can we make a return best on? They're like, well, I could invest in games or oil or gas or Tesla cars or what, like, it's just a whole other level. So yeah, like the size of the bets and the size of the returns are just off the chart.
Yeah, and it definitely seems like they're a global, they're a money company, right? They're a money company, and every now and then they see like a Minecraft or a $2 billion exit, and they're like, oh, there's something interesting happening over there. Let's get some domain specialists and then focus and see if we can find some opportunities there. But yeah, they're money people. I think games publishers are games people. VC capitalists are money people. They could also be games people, but primarily they're money people. Let's move on to crowdfunding. I'm trying to think if either of you have crowdfunded anything at this point.
I did a tiny little Indiegogo.
Okay.
For a sort of fair, like a confused, shall we say, mobile game, and it didn't do terribly well. It was an experiment. Like, I wanted to learn what crowdfunding was, and I did. It didn't succeed. I also did some with Appy Nation on a similar kind of thing, but that was very much like a focus game. That, like, I learned an awful lot from that. More like reaffirming my previous assumptions and lessons than it was stuff. But.
Yeah, I mean, I did one for Thomas Was Alone, but it was like a little 2,000 Indiegogo thing just because I needed some money to pay for Danny Wallace, basically.
I have a cat tangled in my headphones. I apologize.
But it's a tough thing, crowdfunding, and I kind of almost feel like, and people always say this, and I'm probably wrong, but like, it feels like it's on the slide. It feels like the perception of it has gone down, like that it's it feels like people are not as willing to spend money on there unless you are a mega returning brand. As someone pointed out, that the really interesting thing Kickstarter's done with games is demonstrated that while people constantly complain about sequels and prequels and brand expansion and all this stuff, when you actually let them vote, they pay for sequels and prequels and brand extensions, and that's interesting. That's interesting.
Yeah, I mean, one thing that I find most interesting when I think about how I'm going to try and raise money, you think about what does a publisher want, what does a venture capitalist want, and one thing I think about is like, what does a crowdfunder want? And I guess at the end of the day, what they want is a good game. right? A good game that they're going to like. And I think that does play into that thing that Mike mentioned, is a lot of people, they have to compare this thing that they're being pitched with things they've already experienced. And if they had a good experience with one thing, it's not surprising that they want a sequel, or they want the spiritual sequel, which is which seems to be the most common nowadays, or that kind of thing. But yeah, I think they want that game, but I think crowdfunding does come with that other side of, they want to believe that they're actually going to get it.
Yeah, it's a way of pre-ordering your dreams, right? Like that's what it looks like to me, and that's how I use it. Like I just back things that I pretty sure won't ever see the light of day, but I'm excited. I want them to happen. But it can work. Like in a studio can make it. What are the guys who are doing the BattleTech one?
I don't know the name of the studio, but yeah,
they've done a few in a row now, and they have consistently delivered solid games, and that creates, a degree of respect which it's clearly just rolling for them. They're still using licenses, obviously, the BattleTech one, but there is a reputation that has been built on crowdfunding.
Absolutely.
And and you definitely, there are examples of people who haven't built a great relationship with their customers and have let people down, and those people, I imagine, would have a harder time going back to crowdfunding now. It scares the hell out of me. Like I might do it one day. I don't want to ever rule it out, but like the idea of having to convince that many people of an idea, and then like being expected to listen to them, and it feels like swapping one publisher for like thousands of publishers, and at least the one publisher like has experience and has shipped games and understands kind of how things work, whereas I guess whenever I hear about crowdfunding, it's anger. It's always kind of people feeling let down, and I'd much rather build a game on my own terms, or on the terms of myself and the publisher, and then see how the audience reacts to it then, rather than that constant over the shoulder kind of backseat driving, which is not, I think they have every right to do it, but I'd rather not take their money, so they do have that right. I'd much rather let them keep their money and then work on the game and then release it, and if the reviews are where they want them to be, and if it looks cool in YouTube videos, then they give me the money. But that's again a luxury, right?
Do you think that, sort of like the games that you've already made sort of would build confidence with the crowdfunding group? I mean, obviously there's the other issues you have with it, but the fact that you've shipped 2 games, do you think that would make it a stronger proposition, or do you think it's, it's an individual thing? Well,
that's the other aspect, is it's a gamble for a developer, because it's a very public embarrassment. Like, imagine if I didn't get the money. Imagine if I went up there, and I think another aspect of crowdfunding is that there has been this kind of competition downwards with crowdfunding, that people are feeling they have to outbid each other in terms of like lowering the costs they're asking for. And if you've worked in games, that like anything under 100,000, like that thing's not coming out. Like that's like, there are basic levels of cost associated with releasing a game, especially if you're involved in console as well. So you look at those things, and obviously that can be done, and you can do things, but they take 3 times as long. But like the kind of money that I think I would realistically be asking for on a crowdfunding website to make, something like Volume or a little bit better, that's a gamble. If for whatever reason, people weren't interested in the idea, or, my audience wasn't as big as I anticipated it being, or whatever, that's a very, very public kind of failure. And I think a lot of devs at my level, where we've achieved some success, but like we're not industry legends, I think would look at Kickstarter and stuff like that and be a little bit wary. I think I know I am. Like I don't think it'll be a sure thing.
It's an interesting thing you say. Like it's a very public way of sort of failing if you fail, and you're right. But it's also like, surely it's a really good way. Like it's a cost-efficient failure, definitely. It's a very cost-efficient failure.
Yeah,
like,
fail early, right?
I don't think anything, I don't know, like outside of spiritual remakes and stuff, like I think we're like at the point now where it's like original projects, if we're talking about that, if that doesn't do the business on Kickstarter, then you probably shouldn't be making it anyway.
Yeah. I don't think you're wrong. I don't think you're wrong. I think it's a balancing act. I think.
Yeah. I mean, it is sort of like you say, like one publisher for another. It's just like a different set of stakeholders with a whole different set of terms and expectations, I guess. But ultimately, it's like it's a really honest like market test. Although there is an argument to say that there is a sort of a sub market of people who, a lot of gamers just won't invest in crowdfunding stuff, so it's not representative of the full whack or
But
whatever.
you're right, though. There's certainly a measurement there, and it would make you think twice about making a game if it didn't kind of achieve anything on there. But then I've seen great games, fail on their Kickstarters. The one that happened recently was something about neighbors. It was you had a house and there was a bad guy and you had to kind of break in, and it was an AI that would learn your patterns. It was a really interesting looking stealth game. And it just didn't hit target. And I remember being just amazed by that because it looked great. Like, I would buy that game day one, and I feel like there'd be an audience for it, but just didn't work out on Kickstarter. So I hope that one. My hope is that a publisher somewhere saw that and is now sporting that. But they will have a harder time selling that idea to a publisher now because there is this evidence that the game didn't set Kickstarter on fire. So
it's interesting because
there
have been a handful of those where I think it's one of these things, if you try and launch a Kickstarter and you get nowhere near it, then it's like there's not a market for that. But I think people understand that, of all the people that buy games, maybe let's say 20% of them would back a Kickstarter. And so it's like, oh, if you get really close and let's say you basically make like 80 or 90%, then I think publishers might swoop in and say like, well, if we multiply that by 5, that's profitable. And so I know that Allison Road project that happened too, where they were like, oh, there's definitely a demand for this. Maybe not enough for just people that are willing to kickstart it to actually fund it, but there's enough demand there.
It's a tricky one. I think as well, though, I think publishers, like any kind of person making an investment, they look for metrics. They look for something they can use as evidence of this is a sure thing. And even though they understand on an emotional and intellectual level that there is no such thing as a sure thing, they like to see these numbers. Anything that kind of dents that, it not quite managing a Kickstarter, that could be read as that would be certainly, I think a smart publisher would see it the way you described, Moo, but I also think there'd be a lot of publishers who'd be like, no, there's no market.
Yeah, I think one thing that's interesting, if you compare these 3 funding methodologies, I think one of the most dangerous things about Kickstarter is when you run out of money and you need more, you have no recourse. I think if you go to a publisher and you run out of money, you need more, they'll say, well, here's some more money, maybe, but your recoup is higher now.
Yeah. They won't be as friendly about it as you just said.
They won't be as nice. But you go to a venture capitalist and you say, we run out of money, and you pitch back to them and they say, okay, here's some more money, give us more of your company. With crowdfunding, I guess you can do Slacker backer and that kind of thing, but it kind of seems like it's not as easy to say like, oh, I need to go back to a meeting and repitch and we can get that top-up money.
Yeah, it's certainly trickier, and at that point the audience have spent their money, so they rightly feel entitled. And I use that without, I'm not saying entitled as negative. Like, they've earned the right to feel entitled because they've given money. So
they've literally bought it.
They've literally bought it. So, and you can say, Kickstarter's, it's not a pre-order, whatever. You can say that till you're blue in the face, but the reality is that people see it that way, and we're not going to fix that. So that is terrifying, and you've seen this with several Kickstarters, and the developers get torn to shreds. Like, why did you not know? And it's very hard as a developer, I suspect, in those situations to go back to them and go, most games go over budget in the same way as most films do, and it's not good, and no one ever tries for it, and we all, we've all had experiences where we have managed to really tighten things up and pull a game in under budget, but like, it's not a rarity, right? It's a thing that happens. And that's very hard to explain to a player. And frankly, if they've given you money and they're a consumer, then I'm kind of with them. Like, they should get what they paid for. Like, it's a very tough sell. So you see these second Kickstarters or something being split in half or all these kind of things. And I just think that does long-term damage. Damage you won't notice immediately, but I think a few of those pile up and reputations start to get kind of damaged.
Yeah, I mean, 2 things. I think there's actually 3 things I oddly look when I'm considering backing Kickstarter nowadays, other than whether or not I like it. The first thing is how much they're asking for, and if I think they could actually make it. The second one is what they've made in the past, just what their record of delivery is. Mm-hmm. But the third thing, and I don't know if this is fair or not, but Kickstarters that I feel like that are primarily driven by an ideas person and everyone else is only there because they get paid, I'm always a bit more nervous. Like, I think if you see a Kickstarter and the people that are primarily driving it are the people that, are literally day-to-day making the game, you feel like if they run out of money, they'll find a way to keep working on it. Where I've seen a few messes recently where it's like, well, the project ran out of funding and nobody's going to work on it in their spare time if they're not paid. And I think it's a hard situation because a lot of projects, as you say, do run over budget, and you have to think about, well, what's going to happen when that goes over budget or when it takes too long.
Well, the rule is you Scotty it, right? Like you
What does that mean?
Did I invent this? I didn't invent this. You Scottying a project where you overestimate. So you say, I think this game is going to cost X, and then the budget is 1.2 times that, because
Okay.
you know something's going to come up and something's going to go wrong. You Scotty it. You overestimate, and then you know you're going to hit that wall. So
Yeah.
it's fine. But the and if you're not, don't, then you just spend that money making the game better. But the to be honest, like, I disagree with you to an extent there, just purely because, like, I hate the idea of anyone working for free on stuff that, like, if they're shareholders, then fair enough. If they're going to get a percentage of the game's revenue, but any deal other than that, like, I think I've been a bit outspoken on Twitter about this. Like, no one works for free.
Yeah.
No one.
Yeah.
I will pay. I don't do that, and I wouldn't do that, even if things were against a wall. Like, I'd start paying people in percentages. Like, it's tricky, and I kind of.
Yeah,
I
I
sort
would
of
definitely
don't want
assume a rev share in that kind of situation.
So if
yeah.
you're talking about that, then fair enough. But if it's a case of, like, I don't think a developer's lazy if they want to get paid for a day's work.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean,
Yeah.
the big sticker is that, like you say, Mike, you're right. You overestimate, but then you can't do that on Kickstarter and get it funded, because the perception of what it takes to make a game is so wildly inaccurate, and it's been perpetuated by Kickstarter, or rather, the people doing it. The successful projects are the ones that go like 200% over their backing requirement. And that is a realistic budget,
Yeah.
But when people are saying, like, oh yeah, 50 grand to make a game with a team of 5 people, you're like, no, it's not.
No, it's not.
It's nowhere near it. What the hell's going on?
It's like the first 3 months.
Yeah, and it's a bonkers thing. I wonder if in a few years, that it'll sort of like get a bit more realistic again. Maybe, I don't know. I don't know.
I think it'll get a lot worse before it gets better, unfortunately. But that might just be good old-fashioned cynicism. I might be being fair.
Yeah, I'm trying to think of, like, the Kickstarters that have delivered for me recently. I think it's always been a reasonable enough budget. I think that's always key. It's just like you count the number of people that they show, or even just, like, I guess for us, we know how many people it takes to make a certain kind of game, and you just sort of work that out and say, well, it takes this many people about this much time, and are they close to that? Because I think if something's doing well, there are ways to find that extra money, or that the rev share split to make people put the extra time in. And I think that's sort of how I think about it. But yeah, I recently saw a project that I'm like, oh, this looks really interesting, and it was raising less than $100,000 for a team of 12, and I was like, that's and
that stuff scares me, though, because that makes a misunderstanding, because there will probably be people listening to this or watching this at some point who go $100,000. That's loads of money, and that's like, that doesn't scale. Like, and it's really worrying, because the more people do this, the more the perception becomes, you can make a game with 12 people for $100,000, and that causes problems in terms of, it does, and it causes problems because that project is doomed to fail unless they're being dishonest, and this is basically making a pitch in order to sell to a publisher. But then you should be transparent about that, and you should explain it, because $100,000 to make amazing, impressively visually impressive prototype. That's my door. That's fine. Hopefully, fingers crossed. That's possible. Like, that might be it, but I'm not sure.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, I'm trying to think. Do either of you have anything else to add about crowdfunding, or should we jump onto the other models?
I was quite interested to mention the fact that a lot more examples of publishers jumping in. I mean, we mentioned them getting close to their target. I think just number of investors or backers or something is actually quite relevant as well. But just whether it's a trend that continues, that basically smaller or mid-tier publishers see something in trouble, and maybe, like, I don't know how often it's like the publishers are looking and see something, and how often it is the team are like, oh god, this isn't going to work, we need to find something to help. I know I forget the name of the companies involved, but Indivisible recently, it's a really, really nice prototype and a cool game. I haven't backed it, but it hopefully it will make it.
I
but
have.
That's you have kids. Yeah, that's one that went like from a failed Kickstarter to an Indiegogo.
Oh, was it? I didn't realize that.
Yeah,
I know
I
that.
think they've had a few tries at it.
Yeah, I'm not. I may have got that wrong. I think maybe they started a Kickstarter and it just they were like, this isn't going to make it, so they pulled it or something. Anyway, someone will do some research in the chat. Yeah, and then they've kind of announced that, oh hey, we've got like a publisher who will throw in like a significant amount of money. I believe it's like whatever the original target was, but only if they make that target. So there's like a lot of like, wrangling and stuff, but people like getting involved in a cause, and that's the worry about like people like investing in or backing things that are going to peak it as well. So that's the worry about things that beat their target by a huge amount, but only because they undercut the estimate in the first place, so that they could get that like positive push. Like you've made the target and then you get a ton more investment, and you're like, that's not okay in some ways, because it just like even further twists the reality. And anyway.
Yeah, because the question is, what if you just barely make it, and it's just like, well, you're sort of, so they're basically calling your bluff, and that's
which is
bad
terrifying.
for everyone.
Like, because the advice that everyone gives is like, ask for half of what you need. It's like, no. That's not going to work well. Yeah, no, it's horrible.
I've never heard that advice. That's
I've
terrifyingly
heard that
bad
advice
advice.
from people. I know, but you hear it, and I think I've seen like Gamma Sutra threads and stuff, and you're just watching, and you're like, how many people who've not made enough stuff to understand how budget works are going to read this and get the wrong end of the stick? I think that's the other thing with Kickstarter, is that it's very attractive. You've got a visitor. It's very attractive to people who are making like their first game, because they haven't got the contacts to go to, or they don't feel they've got the contacts to go to a publisher. They haven't got the money in the bank to pay for it themselves. So Kickstarter seems to be Kickstarter. That's awesome. Kickstarter starts to feel like a good path, and Kickstarter is probably the worst place in the world for someone starting out to go and get money, because they're trapped by that naivety, because they ask for 100,000 for them and 10 mates. This is awesome, the cameo that's happening. They ask for $100,000 for them and 10 mates, and then they have to make the thing. It worries me that reputations are ruined before they have the chance to be earned in all of these cases.
Yeah, I've been distracted by my cat. I apologize for that. Yeah, I mean, the Indivisible one, it's interesting because they had already done a successful Indiegogo for Skullgirls, which, they did the thing where they asked for a reasonable amount. They asked for like 1.5 million, but they also said 1.5 million isn't even enough to make this game. We've got this publisher on hand, and they'll only put their money in if we sort of prove that there's the demand for it. And I think it's definitely one of the most. I think one of the reasons I was so interested in it is like it's one of the most honestly run crowdfunding campaigns that I've seen. Is that they've been upfront about everything, and they've actually, talked to the press and tried to come back and educate, about how much this game is going to cost and why it's going to cost that and why it is structured the way it is. And then obviously I played the demo and it was pretty awesome. So But yeah, I think it's. I'm hoping. I mean, I have no idea how things will go, but I am, of course, hoping that projects like this will start to change the perception of like, oh, this game costs nothing to make, and But on the other hand, the other strange thing is that I have seen projects that raise almost nothing. Like I think Undertale is one of these projects where I think they asked for $8,000, and I think the key there was that. I don't know if they ran out of money or not, or if it was plenty of money, because I think they did raise 40 or 50 in the end. But because the main developer could do so many of the bits and pieces, even if they ran out of the money, he could, get freelance work and continue working on it nights and weekends, or, that kind of thing. So I think it's harsh, but yeah, I tend not to back things that have way too low, or basically that I don't think they could make it for that kind of money. But there are some weird cases where it just kind of worked out anyway.
Yeah, and you've got insider knowledge, right? So you know whether something's realistic or not. Yeah. And I mean, that's the thing, Mike. You're saying there's been advice about this for people to just go in and undercut on purpose, and you're like, this is at conferences and stuff where the people should know better, but that's the whole point. Like, as a market, Kickstarter has expectations, and you if you go in, with a realistic budget, chances are you're not going to make it. So, and if you go in with a lower one, then the chances are you'll make it to that, and at some point you'll probably be able to like cancel it yourself, positive action. And if you're not going to make it, or if it's going to cut too close, if you're worried about it, and you can kind of claim some sort of, at least avoid any sort of negative, kickback from cancelling, rather than just letting it run its course and it sort of failing in inverted commas. But it's so weird and complex.
Cool. I was trying to think. It's running a bit long, and I don't want to go into these more unconventional funding models, especially because one of them is self-funding, which I think we could talk about for hours on end. So maybe we should jump to questions real quick.
Yeah, sure.
I guess if anyone has any more questions, please add them. I'm going to start scrolling from the top and see what I spot. First one is from Jup. Is it possible with someone or for someone with no degree and just a portfolio to get AAA work?
Yeah.
If the portfolio is good. One thing I've been told is that this differs internationally. So in the UK, like not having a degree doesn't really have a mega effect. But I've heard, and Moo, you can probably explain this better to me, like in America, a college degree does, like not having a college degree might hit you 5 years into your career, might make it hard to be a manager or something like that.
I wouldn't say in the games industry.
Okay.
Like there definitely are industries where degrees are very important. The games industry just happens not to be one of them.
Okay, so similar to here then. Okay.
But yeah.
On a sort of a tangent to that, it's something I've been thinking about recently. But like, if you're looking at your portfolio work, don't get friends to tell you whether it's any good. Try and find people that you are just acquaintances with, to give you a reliable feedback. Like if you were to send to one of us, I'm sure we would try and be nice, but we'd at least be honest, because we don't have any personal investment in how you feel about that feedback.
Yeah.
But yeah, like be very, very wary of, like, regardless of your degree, any portfolio work, you just make sure you get honest feedback. It's really, really hard to come by, but it's so valuable.
Or from people in the games industry itself, like any opportunity you get to show a portfolio to someone who actually hires people, is really useful.
Cool. The next question is from Bo the Xbox Pro. I'm not sure I fully understand it, so I'll read it out loud, and I'm sure you guys will understand it better than I do. But thoughts on Shenmue 3 basically asking for more money, essentially, if you want the best game. Oh, yeah. That now that I've read it out loud, I understand. Yeah. So what do you think about, crowdfunding projects that sort of set one goal and then say, well, if you actually want the game you want, here's the other goal?
I think it's a necessity of what we've been talking about, is that they have to set a minimum that they can hit. So stretch goals in general make sense. At the time, of doing a pitch, you have to, because you have to incentivize people to go higher, but also you do want to make sure you get the money if they go lower. After the fact, which I don't know if that happened with Shenmue, but you definitely see these kind of top-up Kickstarters where people are like, no, we need a bit more money, I think that's a tough sell, but I think it mirrors the kind of money that those kind of games with that kind of production value cost these days.
It's interesting that you say it's necessary, but like, I guess would you do that? Like, because I feel like even if you feel like it is like this is the only way the game is going to be made, I still don't think it's a healthy way to make it. Personally,
I don't like the idea of breaking up. Like, for me, a game's the game. Like, I don't like the idea of an itemized list of features that you can add, because it's like, if that's how you're designing your game, then it's probably not cohesive. If it can be broken into a menu of options, then I'm not sure it's that good a game. But
it's just a great mini game collection. Oh, sorry, go ahead.
I think the interesting thing about anything like Shenmue, where like a huge part of their strategy is to make a story of it happening, right? So they absolutely had to guarantee that they made their first target. Like it was just inconceivable that wouldn't succeed, and they like the world would have exploded for a start. Like, we all know that. But like, basically, there were an incredible amount of incredibly clever people working out the way to get that done, and it probably involved going, right, actually, this isn't enough to make it. Obviously, I think everyone kind of knew that anyway. So it's no surprise that they've gone ahead. But I would bet money that it was part of the plan from the start, because they absolutely had to make sure that it was successfully funded and that production started and all this kind of stuff. That doesn't apply to everything. I think it does apply to most games crowdfunding that are based on like bringing back an actual sequel to something that people, or like a spiritual sequel. But yeah, like I'm being very cynical, but like I can't fathom a world where that bunch of smart people weren't aware that this was going to happen, and like would just do everything they could to make sure that it went over that first blip, and then from there it's a success story, and it will just carry on being like success breeds success. So
Yeah, I guess it's really hard with a sequel because I feel like a lot of games, what you can say is like, well, there's a core game we want to make, and there's a bunch of really cool stuff that we could add, and there's a certain like, culmination of all those things that sort of brings it to this other tier. And I think it's if you have an A plan and a B plan, then that's one thing. But I feel like if you have a plan A and you ask for the price of plan B, and you're really vague and you sort of say like, oh, we can make plan A for the cost of plan B, like I just feel like it's dishonest personally. But
it absolutely is. I don't think I agree with it morally, but I think as like a business practice in like we touched on it earlier, Kickstarter crowdfunding, you're selling a bit of a dream, and if everything's spelled out exactly and there's a spreadsheet and a schedule that's actually accurate, there is no dream. There's no room for people to get invested. It's like it's of no interest to a lot of people. Like it's interesting to us because we're like, I don't think this is going to make it. Let me see. But most people, you need some element of vagary because otherwise, there's nothing to hook into with your imagination. Aside from that, you can always just cut the voice acting as well.
Never.
Cool. The next question is from Dralig. So I'm 18 and I began a games development course in September. As a broad question, what would you say are the key skills you want to see from people that fresh faces don't have?
So I'm gonna answer different questions. No, I'll answer his question. So honestly, the thing that you won't have coming off of a degree that is useful to me as an employer is experience. Is that when that unfortunately universities are never going to actually be able to accurately capture what it's like to make a video game. So unfortunately, that's just something you're not going to get. You're not going to come out of that degree with that real world experience. So that's something that's always going to give everyone an edge over you. And that's fine. You're going to work your way through the industry and you're going to learn. So my best advice to someone who's coming out of a degree, which I think is the more immediate question for you, is an ability to take on that experience and to learn, and an ability to take feedback and do as you're told. Like if you want a job, it's not the most exciting or glamorous way of putting it, but like you need to be someone who is going to be given a task to do, who will do it, who will take the feedback given to them by other people in the company and get that done. And so often you see graduates coming out of university degrees who think that they can become Cliffy B immediately and that's going to be their job. And that's something that when I run into it, it's like, no, you're going to be placing crates for 3 years. You're going to be the dude or the girl in the office doing those kind of menial jobs, and it's not exciting, but being able to do that and just get on with it and not be moaning about it, but also be trying to find opportunities to do cooler things and to work your way up the company. Obviously, being a good employee is honestly the best tip I can give.
Yeah, I get your gist, but I think if you're only placing crates for 3 years, you've got other issues.
3 years was an exaggeration.
yeah.
But
I think there's a lot
6 months. Yeah.
There's a lot of room to get work experience during those things. Like you're right, Mike. It's not directly related to the courses specifics. It might be. There are some courses that do a gap year or whatever, but like broadly, like you should be able to get like QA placements, summers, jobs, things like that, just anything and everything. And the fact that you've got any of that by the time you come out will show a level of sort of interest and passion that's like above everyone else. What was the specific was there a specific what's the word, like design code, was it, or is it just generally
games development, they say?
Yeah, games development. Well, in that case, I mean, there's probably a big difference for me between having a bunch of playable things on your portfolio and actually having released them into a market. Mm-hmm. So like even if that's Newgrounds or Kongregate, or actually on Steam somehow or whatever, just like if you've actually sold your games, it doesn't matter how many, like it really doesn't, but that bit is usually the kind of the experience that you get from working like professionally, than the teamwork and stuff that Mike was talking about.
Cool. Important question from Mike Stout. What is the name of the cat? The cat that keeps walking on screen is my cat Honey, who I adopted from Alex Evans, and my other cat's name is Yorda, but she hasn't made an appearance this episode.
Nice.
But cool. I think we're out of questions for tonight, and I guess we'll continue the discussion on funding next time. So everyone, thanks for joining us. I guess you can find me on Twitter at one of Moo.
I'm at Mike Bithell.
And I'm at Spilt Milk Studio.
So if you have any longer form questions, you can just email them to gamefactorypodcast@gmail.com. And obviously click all the things like and subscribes and blah, blah, blah.
You're really good at this.
Yeah, I'm really excited about this part. Although we did get one review on iTunes, so if you could leave a second review, that'd be amazing.
2 reviews would make me very happy.
But yeah, thanks for joining us, everyone.
Thanks, guys. Bye.
Bye.